Good afternoon. It's Dan Kerr's DK Analytics. It is Tuesday, April 7th, 2020. The topic of this video is the virus lockdown stench. Long-lasting like a skunk's, but more insidious. Before I delve into it, some valuation metrics. The US dollar index stood at 99.8. The Fed's balance sheet at $5.8 trillion. The US 10-year had a yield of 0.76. The S&P 500 stood at 2707. These are intraday rates today, April 7th. Oil stood at $26.34 per blue barrel. Gold at $1,694 per troy ounce, and silver at $15.56 per troy ounce. The buck is again drifting lower. The S&P has leapt 9.6% so far this week, and stocks overall have surged the most in almost 2 weeks after the reported death tolls in some of the world's coronavirus hotspots showed signs of easing, and initial signs of lockdown reversals spread throughout Europe. Initial signs of lockdown reversals. Plus, Trump even suggested the other day that he might possibly seek to relax Easter Sunday worship restrictions to the extent that the federal government even has any power to do that, but that's another story. With massive monetary and fiscal crony pork being rolled out, hard assets also have been doing well the last 2 days, from oil to precious metals. On the reported virus numbers front, here goes an update that might not surprise you if you have been following my work recently. The number of confirmed coronavirus cases worldwide rose 5.7% on Monday, April 6th, to 1,348,000, the lowest percentage increase since the 10th of March. The number of active cases rose 5.5% on the day, yesterday, April 6th, to 1,070,000, an absolute increase of 56,000, the smallest absolute increase in 7 days. Meanwhile, total global deaths attributed to the coronavirus stood at 76,420, even as previous underlying conditions haven't always been adequately fingered or parsed. Separately, both California and even hard-hit Washington state have been able to transfer hundreds of ventilators to states in greater need. When we consider confirmed coronavirus cases, let's not forget that the globe's population is some 7.8 billion people. Also, recall in the US alone, 600,000 people tragically die of cancer every year, and over 600,000 of heart disease. Staying in the US, 7,700 people die daily on average for a host of reasons. I'm saying that to compare or frame the corona death statistics, which in the US have topped 11,000 to the best of my knowledge. For more details regarding the corona pandemic and policymakers' response to it, including links to some meaty pieces on this topic, please visit my site, DK Analytics, post number 59, or see the comments section of this YouTube channel, or have a listen to my "Is the cure worse than the disease?" question. That video where I address the fact that this virus's death toll, as calculated by leading politically incorrect immunologists, will likely be between 0.1% and 0.6% of those infected. As even Dr. Fauci of the Center for Disease Control, the CDC, admitted in a late March 2020 New England Journal of Medicine piece. This mortality rate between 0.1% and 0.6% is comparable to other viruses, yet we didn't lock down the world back then. Instead, we focused on protecting those most vulnerable and doubled down on applying off-the-shelf RX relief for those or to those suffering, as is currently increasingly and successfully taking place, thank God. In the interim, we remained open for business. This furthered the very herd immunity antibodies, Mother Nature's protective response, that helped stamp out a virus's ability to spread widely. Such a response could turn the coronavirus's justifiably feared quality of spreading like wildfire into a societal advantage, as the most robust members of society would turn into a virus wet blanket. We all know that precious lives will continue to be lost to this virus, as are tragically lost to multiple other diseases and accidents. We are all mortal, and we are an aging society, which is even more susceptible to the grim reaper. As regards the coronavirus in particular, perhaps some of us will tragically lose family members or friends to this virus in particular, or even succumb to it ourselves. And this virus will impact VIPs, such as the Prime Minister of the UK, who is currently in tough shape in an IC unit, but apparently stabilizing. And he's in that state thanks to having contracted the coronavirus. But we cannot afford to long shut down businesses and freedom on an epic scale without risking huge economic, social, and political collateral damage. Damage that will end up being anything but collateral, as I've mentioned once before. It will become the main horror show. In other words, an economic shutdown or quarantine cure, if broadly sustained much longer, will be much worse than the likely death toll from the virus itself, because we will lose our societal ability, our income, and our leveraged economic output to deal effectively with a whole broad host of health challenges, even as food, shelter, and healthcare become increasingly rationed and suicide rates related to losing jobs and businesses, sometimes cultivated over generations, go bankrupt. According to some surveys and statistics, up to 40%, 40% of small businesses in the US, the backbone of employment, risk closing their doors, some forever, if they cannot reopen for business within a few days to a week or two. Related to these observations, a close, nearly lifelong friend of mine drew the following comments to my attention. They appeared on Twitter this past Sunday. I think they're apt as hell. Here goes. The first comment. The question we have to ask ourselves is, will the hundreds of thousands of people who have had their businesses destroyed, lost their jobs, and can no longer feed their families really look back at this quarantine and say, the government saved my life? Wealthy elitists might. Or another comment. I've noticed that every single doctor, expert, bureaucrat, politician, and media personality pushing for everyone else to lose their jobs and stay at home indefinitely still have their jobs. This is the virus response stench that I'm talking about. Never let a good crisis go to waste to accumulate more power by those that control the instrumentalities of power. This is Rahm Emanuel's famous Saul Alinsky Rules for Radicals adaptation. You know, straight from Obama's and Hillary's philosophical manifesto. No joke. In fact, I'd argue that the coronavirus response takes statist Emanuel's theory one big step further. Instead of more passive, never let a good crisis go to waste, how about actively creating a crisis to consolidate power and scare the daylights out of the sheeple, such as the World Health Organization's initial 3 to 4% coronavirus mortality rate claim, or the CDC's if the government hadn't intervened, 2 million Americans would succumb to the coronavirus claim. And while our elitists demagogue, they bail out their K Street and their Wall Street buddies, and Main Street gets intimidated, shut down, and then eviscerated. How does one spell socialism going vertical on the J curve? And once the power and the money grab are complete, wealth and power will be even more concentrated in the hands of fewer still, and the virus peaks. Then the statist politicians, 99% of them, and the bureaucrats, 100% of them, and their crony pals on Wall Street and K Street can let us know, as the virus peaks, that due to their police state tactics and their wise, tough policies, that the crisis is now abating. That is, for them, the 1% will have never had so much power and wealth and income, and they already have record levels of all three. Meanwhile, Main Street's nightmare and loss of freedom will possibly only have really gotten started. And should the virus not be peaking out or show near-term acceleration, why then wholly unconstitutional police state tactics and yet more Main Street financed redistributionism to our elites will occur or reoccur. Now, before you think that I am wearing a tinfoil conspiracy theory hat, consider these recent facts and developments. A daily coronavirus test would give Americans confidence to interact again, announced St. Louis Fed President Bullard 2 days ago. Bullard laid out a system where every American would be tested every day and would wear a badge with their negative coronavirus result. If we are going to be Orwellian while we trample on the Constitution's privacy protections and thus possibly set a frightful precedent, how about a test which instead measures virus antibodies, which would then instill confidence in expanding herd immunity instead of more fear about the virus? And if a banker is suggesting this, imagine all the other bureaucrats that are likely already on board. Honestly, it makes me wonder what's next, possibly being forced to turn in your dollar bills and only able to pay with the very credit and debit cards that the government has complete transactional insight into, while simultaneously castrating your ability to withdraw your money parked at a bank, thus rendering depositors' ability to stoke a bank run obsolete while conveniently facilitating bail-ins. Another development that I'd like to double down on or revisit. The Fed's balance sheet has expanded by a mind-bending $2.1 trillion since the repo bailout of Wall Street began in mid-September 2019. And the Fed has been very busy taking toxic assets off the hands of financial institutions, and it is also widely expanding its bailout umbrella to bankrupt states and municipalities. Once again, talk about moral hazard. The spendthrifts get saved and the frugal get screwed. Meanwhile, after state and local governments in the US have largely shut down small businesses, that is Main Street, with huge CDC encouragement and surely thanks to litigation fears, the $350 billion in small business funds set aside out of the $2.2 trillion bailout bill are proving difficult to tap, according to various reports and 3 personal sources at the small business level. Plus, the small businesses taking the loans will have to pay 5% interest annualized on the outstanding balance, while the banks administering the SBA loans, Small Business Administration loans, are looking at a 5% of loan origination windfall. Once again, Wall Street bailout cronyism over Main Street capital access and equitable cost of capital. In a nutshell, the 880-page CARES Act, written by K Street elves and unread by Congress, constitutes the biggest wealth transfer in history from taxpayers to the super rich. According to the sole US congressman that wanted to vote against it, Representative Thomas Massie from Kentucky, who is also the same congressman that had the guts to demand a tabulation of the yeas and nays on the House floor as Article 1, Section 5 of the US Constitution stipulates, namely, a majority of each chamber shall constitute a quorum to do business. Yet the House refused to do this because all Congress people but Representative Massie wanted to avoid personal culpability. Do you see what I mean about broad daylight lawlessness? Representative Massie appeared on Ron Paul's Liberty Report yesterday, Monday, April 6th, to discuss how he was chided and treated as an instantaneous political leper for wanting to uphold the Constitution from President Trump on down, both sides of the aisle. I will provide the link to that chat behind the scenes at the $2 trillion coronavirus bailout with Representative Thomas Massie in the descriptive part of this video. And by the way, the Senate, dominated by spendthrift Republicans that used to be fiscal conservatives, voted 96-0 in favor of this biggest transfer of wealth in history. So, what's the bottom line? I think people in positions of power will continue to use this crisis to massively enrich and empower themselves and their buddies, further spitting on the rule of law, that is, on the US Constitution. This is being manifest and further unheralded counterfeit currency debasement along, frankly, fascist lines, via Bill of Rights violations regarding the right to assemble peacefully, via Bill of Rights violations regarding privacy protections, and via Bill of Rights violations regarding property right protections. How so? Through capricious, bankrupting shutdowns of much of Main Street, which is already suffocating under compliance and litigation insanity, and via money printing that bails out and enriches the very Wall Street that owns the Fed and also benefits big business and their K Street lobbyists whose bidding the US Congress is doing, not the people's. And by the way, if you collapse a $21 trillion economy, how is a crony bailout of 2.2 trillion or 6.5 trillion with the Fed on board going to keep the economy pulsating if the maligned heart of employment, small business, gets whacked? How can Main Street respond? Well, by insisting on constitutional rights, even if the people controlling the instrumentalities of power act lawlessly. And, by the way, I thought we'd seen the limit on this, with Hillary and Comey and Strzok and Brennan and Holder and Obama, whose epic abuses of power are yesterday's news. But once again, how can Main Street respond to the current extreme abuse of power, the fallout from the coronavirus or the virus response? I'd say by standing tall for the Bill of Rights protections, much as some sheriffs have done in numerous corners of the US, specifically by refusing to enforce state laws that violate the Second Amendment. Locally, for me, in terms of asking officials why Southwest Florida beaches must stay closed, even though anyone but families and close friends, as at the dinner table at home, are much further than 6 feet apart virtually 100% of the time at any beach I've ever been to in Southwest Florida. In short, one freedom-loving citizen after the other has to resist folding to unconstitutional, nonsensical, bankrupting bullying by the authorities, especially those acting unconstitutionally. In short, to remain coronavirus vigilant, like with any influenza, but to push back against what could prove to be one mother lode of a power grab which threatens to forever change the balance of power between the true sovereigns, the people, and a well-defined, clearly limited government that is supposed to serve them, not the other way around. And while we're at it, we may seek to contact our congressmen and senators and implore them to set aside a tiny chunk, a few billion, out of the 2.2 trillion in bailout funds to improve the robustness of our creaky national power infrastructure grid, which is highly susceptible to both electromagnetic storms, acts of nature, and to acts of sabotage. For without electricity, nothing works, from HVAC systems to manufacturing to the gas pump to the hospital to the internet. I know, I've endured 3 hurricanes. If the losses of power associated with those powerful storms had extended beyond a few days, the 24/7 power we depend on for the life we know comes to a halt, and widespread shortages of vital goods and services will quickly make virtually any virus threat look tiny by comparison. And for Americans, who long represented the last best hope for individual freedom in the world, to not let this happen. What am I talking about? This is a depiction of George Washington, and you can imagine him saying this from his grave and giving us the collective middle finger for what we're doing, namely, let me go to here. When you defeat the largest empire on the planet, just to watch your descendants give up all their liberty over a virus, then you want to give those people or the descendants the middle finger. I think that is incredibly apt. I hope you see it too. Meanwhile, regarding your investable portfolios, don't forget to take out fire insurance. It isn't often that you can still take out fire insurance at a highly attractive price because clearly there is a monetary and fiscal fire already burning brightly. I hope you found my thoughts worthy of reflection. This is Dan Kurz, DK Analytics, on Tuesday afternoon on April 7th, 2020. I'm going to sign off here. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.